How do you help students who can out-chop you? Is it even possible, or are you wasting their own time? So I've been on both ends of the coin in this particular scenario, so I want to describe what that perspective was like from a student perspective and from an educator perspective. So when I was a student, I had a professor, Dr. Mark Sunkett, who was a phenomenal educator, and he had a profound impact on my own playing, but he could barely play anymore because of like some injuries that he received and just like arthritis and whatnot. He showed me the power of what a good teacher could do, a good educator could do, because I improved without him actually needing to be able to demonstrate anything on a drum. A disclaimer, it's obvious that chops takes a long time to develop. It's going to take years of constant effort to be able to develop the skills to be able to play fast, play some like rudimental stuff, whatever, to develop your chops. However, I would argue that it's actually harder to develop an ear for what quality sound is than it is to actually be able to play fast. His expectations for like what was possible with playing were much higher than my own, because I just didn't know that it could be at like the levels that he was expecting from me as his student. And so despite me being able to out-chop him, he had much higher expectations and was able to help me to elevate to a new level beyond what I was able to do when I first started studying with him. One of the reasons why is because he has worked with like so many students over the years. Like he had been teaching for decades at that point. And so he knew many different ways to be able to achieve different kinds of results for different kinds of students who had different kinds of performance-related things that they were like trying to improve, etc. So an educator who has like been a performer knows what it takes to be able to get to a certain level. But when they've taught like many different types of students at different levels, they've also seen how others have been able to achieve the results that like current students might want to do. So even if an educator is unwilling or unable to put in the amount of time to achieve the results, because like maybe they like know what it takes to be able to like play, I don't know, flam drags super fast or something. Maybe they just don't have the time for that. They're not willing to invest the time for that. They can at least learn how to do it from that outsider perspective, that emic perspective, by teaching other different people who are able to do that. And then they're able to take that perspective and apply it into the lessons that they are teaching and break things down in different ways that the performer might not be able to do. So if you are a student who is able to outperform or out-chop your like private lesson instructor or whatever, they are still going to be able to likely have perspectives from working with many different students that they can provide to help you with your own performing. So it's not like, oh, well, as soon as I can play like a flam drag faster than my teacher, got to go to another one. Like that's not how that's going to work. They're going to be able to provide many different things to think through and to improve that are going to be beyond just like the thing that you're able to out-chop them on. I will say as an educator perspective though, that the higher up you go in terms of like the abilities of the students that you're working with, the more likely the students are going to develop expertise in areas that are beyond yours. And that's just normal. That's totally okay. So the more students that you work with, the more context that you teach in, and the more subjects that you teach, it's going to help you to better understand and better be able to support the students that you were working with, because you will have worked with many different kinds of students. So even though like my 3 degrees are in music education, I've also taught computer science education and makerspace classes. And I've taught every single grade, kindergarten through doctoral students. So like all of that range informs one and the other. There's no silver bullets with teaching, which is one of the things that like as an educator, I get frustrated with, is like, well, if you just do this one thing, your classroom is going to be great. Not really. Like every student is going to learn differently. So the more that you teach, the more context that you teach in, like if you teach in an ensemble setting versus private lesson settings, those can help you inform the other. And then if you teach other subject areas, that can also help. The better you're going to become as an educator if you're teaching in different ways in a different context, etc. There's a ton of research on education and whatnot. So there's like some approaches that statistically are going to work better than others in different specific contexts. But again, teaching is not just like a delivery of instruction. It's also understanding like the different psychology of the individuals that you work with. So as an example, one of the things that I have a problem with is instructional design research. So instructional design research, they talk about like, hey, we did this study and we found that if you present this kind of visual, it is going to be like 10% more effective at teaching this concept than if you present this other type of visual. And like that is important to understand and all. But for me, one of the things that I preferred to focus more on was the educational psychology kind of research, because the people you are working with are all going to have different things to consider outside of just the content that you are teaching. And if you teach people from a holistic perspective, then this will help to make it so that they can like learn better and be in a better state of mind to be able to perform or whatever it is that you're trying to do. So for example, outside of like the chop side of things that you might work with students on, there are other things on the mental side of things related to practicing that you might be able to help a student with. So even if a student can out-chop you, you could help them with developing their attention or improving their mindset or developing better consistency with their performing or their practice habits or healthy recovery routines, etc. So there's like many things outside of just being able to play something fast that you can help them out with. So for example, I listened to an interview with a Blue Devils instructor, and I forget who it was because I listened to it a few years ago, so apologies for not remembering it. But the person was talking about how at the level that they were teaching at, that they were spending more time focusing on managing personalities rather than like helping with like technique and whatnot. So they're trying to get people into a mindset to be able to perform at their best ability level rather than like showing them, hey, here's how you played this thing faster or cleaner or etc. The idea of like a student out chopping you, well, therefore you have nothing to teach them, that is like a reductionist viewpoint of like what is the purpose of education from my perspective as like a music educator and whatnot. You can teach students how to teach themselves if you apply it into like a lesson setting or into like an ensemble setting like drumline or whatever. You're focusing more on the long-term growth through analysis and reflection, the student's own analysis and reflection of their own playing and setting their own goals and like creating exercises, etc., rather than creating a reliance for you on as an educator. So for example, like when I was teaching in the K-8 coding classes, computer science classes, because I was the district mentor, I was often like going out to other schools and like providing assistance to other teachers. I was presenting at conferences, etc. So it was like frequently not in my classroom and there were substitutes in there. And so when students would come to me with a question, I would ask them a question in response. Even though I knew how to tell them to do the thing, I would try to get to think through the steps that they would be able to solve whatever bug they had with their program on their own. And I've applied the same thing into different music classes as well, or ensembles or private lessons. Hey, we're having issues with flam drags and clarity. What are some exercises that we can come up with that would be able to help out with that or whatever it is that you're working on? Let's come up with 3 different ways that you could do this as a group, as a collective. And I'm going to use some like different questions to help guide you towards some paths that you could take. So that way, if I'm not here to teach you, that way they can work on their own. It's the same thing with like when students are practicing at home, like you want them to be able to figure out like, what do I need to do to be able to get to the next level, etc. Like as opposed to, well, I have to wait until like my next lesson next week or in 2 weeks in order to be able to like actually improve on this thing. Some of the kinds of questions that you can ask is like along a continuum. So you can go from like closed to guided to more open questions. So like a closed question might be something like, was the second note early or late? It's like a yes or no. And then it could be like, okay, well, how is the consistency of the diddle interpretation? So that's more like a guided where you're trying to focus on the diddles, but you're not necessarily giving them like yes or no binary answers. And then you can move more towards an open question, which you could ask the student, be like, what did you notice about that rep that we just played? And they might not even talk about diddles. They might talk about something completely different. And that can open up some potential conversations around like mindset. Like, oh, I realized that I started focusing on a conversation that I had with a friend yesterday and it messed up my roles. And it's like, oh, well, we don't need to talk about interpretation. We need to talk about focus. So it's not that like open questions or guided questions are the right way to do it. It's just a continuum that you need to be able to draw upon as an educator to be able to figure out like how to help guide students so that way they can come up with like their own exercises, their own answers, their own reflections, their own analysis of their playing. So again, you can help them to be able to learn long-term as opposed to just providing the answers for them. This is all stuff that you can do even if a student is able to out-chop you. So like as an example, I had a marimba student who got to a point where they were playing a piece better than I could play that particular piece. Thank you for the sub, appreciate it. The student ended up getting into like Berkeley on a scholarship for playing marimba, and they were able to do that even though like I couldn't play that particular piece at that level that they were doing it. So we're using more guiding questions and self-reflection and analysis and talking about the meta of the musicianship. So there's more to musicianship is what I'm trying to say than just like chops or speed. So as another example of this when I was a student is the drum set professor at Arizona State University. Got some lessons with him and I could out-chop him as a rudimental drummer. That was what I focused on, was playing fast and like being able to do like complex rudimental stuff. But everything he played on drum kit sounded amazing. Like just the basic pattern just like bopped. Like I could not do that. So even though I might be able to play like rolls faster or singles faster or whatever, out-chop him technically, everything he played sounded better than I could do. It didn't matter about the speed that I was doing. There's just so much more to musicianship than just being able to play fast, which is something that like more beginner and intermediate people focus on, is that like, ugh, I hit drum fast. Like, especially if you're, well, I won't call out any genres. A lot of beginner and intermediate players are just like, Like, I just want to be able to do that really fast. Cool. There's more to musicianship in drumming than just that, but if you want to focus on that, that's great. Maybe we'll also learn these other things down the road. Now I want to shift it so that we talk about like the perspective from an educator standpoint. So when I was in a position where I was teaching somebody who had more advanced understanding of a topic than I did. So as an educator, I was a doctoral dissertation supervisor. So I was working with somebody who is getting their doctorate in music education. And as their supervisor, I am helping guide them on their dissertation process in terms of like their understanding of the content and knowledge, but also the research methodology that they are using. So while I have expertise in like the topics that I have been studying for years and the methodologies that I have used in the various research that I've done for like my dissertation or for some of the NSF grants that I've done, etc. Sometimes you will work with people at a level who are going to develop like an area of expertise in a content area or in a research methodology that is different than your own as a supervisor. And so you have to be able to figure out some ways to be able to work with them to help them develop that expertise while doing this. So overall, I knew like the meta of research in the field, etc., but I did not have the specific expertise in the area that they were studying for their dissertation. So to get more granular with it, they were doing a study on perspectives of what it meant to be a musician when you were composing music through code. And so while I had perspectives of like the music education background and I had taught computer science, I did not have that expertise in identity development and whatnot. So I had to be able to like ask some questions to understand that the student that I was working with knew their stuff and knew that what they were talking about, and to be able to assist them with being able to improve in the areas that they were researching for their particular dissertations. Sometimes you have to consult outsiders to be able to help with that. So I was an outsider who was asked to work with Boston University to be able to teach that particular student and work with them, supervise them, collaborate with them, etc. Because I had the expertise of the music education background research and then the computer science education research and that combination of them and whatnot, they asked me to work with them. But I still had areas where it's like, oh, I'm not an absolute expert in that thing that you're doing. The more you teach, the more you will see how other people are learning and what works with them, and the more comfortable you will likely be when working with those people who also have areas of expertise that you do not have, and you'd still be able to like supervise, guide, etc., even though you don't have that expertise that they have. Now I want to talk like meta, so like expertise landscape. So imagine you're looking at a giant landscape. On the flat horizon, what you see is your understanding of the field. So if you're like scanning out along this way, you might see some mountains, like just a couple mountains, you might see some hills, you see some plains, and you see some lakes. So each one of these can be used as like a metaphor for what it means to develop expertise in a field as like an educator, as a performer, or whatever. The one or two mountains that you end up seeing are the tall things where you are an expert in, or a student is an expert in. That is like this is what I am known for, an expert able to do above and beyond what most people can do. You also will see some like hills off in the distance. This is where you are above average with like your abilities as a performer. Like I am above average on marimba, but I am not an expert on marimba. So for me, some of my hills might be like some of the concert percussion stuff, but some of my mountains might be marching snare drum, where I have a lot of expertise working on. Now the plains, when you're looking at the flat grounds, that is where you're just like an average musician, you just kind of, or educator, you are at the same level as like most people who are actively like working on this. But then there are the lakes. So the lakes are what you don't know yet. You don't know how deep the water is in the lake. It might just be like shin height or knee height, or it might be like super deep. So that's the areas of expertise that you don't have yet. What you need to be able to learn is how to get comfortable with seeing that landscape and understanding how you fit in it and how your landscape is going to be different than other people's. They're going to have other different kinds of mountains. Thank you for the sub. They're going to have other different kinds of hills, and they're going to have other different kinds of lakes. But what you don't see is how deep that lake is for them. When you get into the higher levels of developing expertise on something, there will be people who are going to outperform you in a lot of different areas. That's normal. That's going to happen. But they're also going to have a lot of deficits that you're not able to necessarily see or notice. And that's also normal. So a lot of people will get that like imposter syndrome where they like assume, oh, I'm the only one who has these lakes with like a lot of depth that I don't understand, but everybody does. The higher up you go and the more you like have heartfelt conversations with people who are at like high performing levels or high teaching levels or whatever, they're all in the same boat. Not everybody is just like peak after peak after peak after peak of expertise. We all have deficits because the amount of time that it takes to actually develop an expertise in either performing or teaching or whatever is going to take time away from other things. So for example, if I wanted to work on like improving my like single speed, the amount of time that I invest into improving my single speed is going to take away time from, I don't know, working on like 4-mallet Stevens grip, etc. And vice versa. If I'm going to work on Stevens grip, it's going to make me worse on this. So like when I was in a percussion studio during my undergrad, there were people who could play stuff on marimba that I was like, how on earth are you doing that? But then you give them a pair of sticks and like I could outplay them out the wazoo. And it's not that one is better than the other. It's just that you've developed different types of expertise. And it's the same thing for the students that you're going to work with. Sometimes the students that you're going to be teaching will have different mountains and different hills and different lakes, different deficits of understanding than you do. And that's just normal. As you teach more, you'll realize that like it's more of a collaborative process when you are working with them. So one, learn how to be comfortable with like not knowing things, but two, develop processes to be able to figure things out together. So for example, when I taught in the computer science space, sometimes a student would ask a question where I'd be like, oh, I actually don't know how to solve that bug, or I don't know how to do that thing. And so we would collaborate together and be able to figure out, and then I would be able to help a student in the future with that similar kind of bug or etc. So it's not this like one directional top down, I am the all-knowing educator and you peon know nothing. That's not how education should work, in my opinion, from my philosophy of education. It should be much more of a collaboration with feedback from the student and from the educator, where you can both learn from each other. Now, this isn't to say that like education and educators like should teach at all levels. Like if you're teaching kindergarten, that doesn't mean that like you're all of a sudden going to be qualified to work with somebody at the doctoral level. There is research on like the different stages of educators and different kinds of educators you have in different phases of your level of expertise. So if you're going from beginner to intermediate to advanced to pro, you might have different types of educators along this process. So for example, the research indicates that when you're a beginner, educators who make things more fun and exciting are going to be better fit for most of the beginner students that you're working with. And when you get to the more intermediate and advanced stuff, it's more about refining your playing rather than just making things fun. And when you get to the professional level, it's going to be more about pushing beyond the limits, etc. If you are an educator who can do all of those different areas, then what you can end up doing is you can adapt to those different situations. So like the way that I taught elementary school was vastly different than the way that I taught graduate school, but they informed the other. So it's not like there's like one way to teach. Same thing with like teaching privately. When I was teaching privately, I'd be like, I will adapt my teaching to whatever your needs are as a student. So if you need some assistance with this thing and you like to be like pushed, or you like to be motivated with like just like doing fun things, playing fun pieces, or me being stricter on you, not in like a mean way or anything, but like having higher expectations for you than you do for yourself, every student's different. So you need to be able to adapt to them, which is what makes teaching like difficult if you're doing it in a group setting. When I was teaching privately, that was so easy to do those adaptations. When you're working with like a class with like 30 some odd students in there and you have to teach them all 30 different ways, good luck with that. There are some ways to do that, but that's a whole nother answer for a whole different topic that I've written out about before. Check out the publication on my website. It's free. Talking about like affinity spaces and whatnot, that talks about how I did that in music education and computer science education context. If you are an educator and you're unwilling to adapt for each one of the students that you're working with, or you're like not willing to develop the expertise that is needed to teach at a particular level, then there will be moments where you're going to have to refer students to somebody else who might be a better fit. So if you're not willing to like have fun while teaching, then maybe don't teach beginners. Refer those beginners out to somebody else. Or if you're not willing to teach in a way that pushes students beyond their limits, you just want to have fun, maybe don't work with the advanced students or with the pros. You got to be able to figure out what you are willing to do as an educator to be able to assist the students that you are working with at different types of levels, different phases in their own journey through musicianship. You can develop expertise not only from doing the thing, but also learning from other people who have done it before you. So you can learn their perspectives on performing or teaching. So this might sound obvious, but if you're going to teach, you need to develop your teaching abilities. I've seen way too many like really good performers who ignored pedagogy, which is like the art or styles of like teaching and different approaches that you can take. And those people who ignore that kind of stuff, they fail as educators. They just assume, well, I can play fast, so therefore like students need to figure it out. No, that's not how that works. Like, you're gonna fail, I promise you. I've seen so many professors who like are the absolute world expert on whatever the subject area is, and they are terrible at teaching that thing. So please invest some time into teaching, or you will fail your students. Trying to be as blunt as possible, but that is going to happen if you do not learn how to teach better. So there's different ways that you can learn how to do this. So you can learn from other educators on other instruments, and you can ask questions like, okay, well, I'm like a percussion instructor, but I see this like violinist. Well, what are they teaching and what are they not teaching? Why are they teaching that particular way as opposed to another way? How are they teaching it this way? What is the steps that they're going through when doing this? How else might you teach this particular concept? So it doesn't have to just be percussionist, and you don't have to just look at the content area that is being taught, but you can also look at the ways that they are doing it. As an example, like when I watch a percussion video, most of what I see in percussion videos I've heard before because I'm old. I've been doing this for a long time. But the ways that they are teaching it are sometimes unique or different or not the way that I would do it. And I ask myself, well, why are they doing it that way as opposed to another way? Is it an intentional thing, or do they not know other ways to do it, etc.? And I'm able to learn from not just the content area, but the ways things are taught. And you as an educator can do that as well. And you'll learn these different perspectives on how to be able to work with different kinds of students, some of whom might be able to outchop you and some of whom might be beginners. But also learn beyond music educators. So like when I did Muay Thai, which is basically like kickboxing, the instructors in there were really good. And the way that they like broke down like the mechanical motions for like if you're going to elbow somebody like in the eyebrow, I was like, wow, I can actually apply the way they are teaching that into like how I talk about like different stroke types or whatever. So like, don't just look at other music educators teaching different types of instruments or percussionists. Also look beyond that. There are some phenomenal educators that you can learn from in different fields. You can learn from like kinesiology, sports psychology, etc. These are all things that I have also tried to invest time into because they're directly applicable to like drumline and teaching percussion. Another thing that you can do as an educator to try and improve, to be able to work with the advanced students, etc., is engage in self-reflection and analysis. So after each one of your lessons, whether it's like a private lesson or like teaching an ensemble or whatever, ask what worked and what can you do to improve it for next time. If you strive for that consistent improvement, you will get better over time. Like it's taken me a long time to improve as an educator. I've been teaching since 2003. And in the multiple decades that I've been teaching, I've been constantly iterating. Every single like year, I'm just getting better and better and better and trying to be able to work with more different kinds of students, different contexts, different subject areas, etc. And so that can be the same thing for you. So if you are at like a level 2 educator right now, well, maybe next year you'll be at level 3, and then maybe 5 years from now you'll be at like level 5, etc. So just keep trying to improve, and don't beat yourself up if you're not able to like teach at the level that you want to right now. It's going to take time, especially if you're comparing yourself to like people who have been around for a very long time, have been teaching for a long time. You're like, I want to do that. Well, cool. They've been doing it for like 2 decades longer than you have. So, you know, invest the time into that. To reiterate this, because it's very important, regardless of if the student overall knows more or less than you, it is a collaborative process where both of you can learn from it. I have taught kindergartners that I have learned something from, either about like how to teach or even a content area that where I've been like, oh, I didn't know that. Odds are the kindergartner has learned more from me, but it's still a collaborative process. You can both learn from each other. So I think that's important to re-emphasize throughout this.